Aloha mai kākou o wau no o Candace Kaleimamoowahinekapu Galla no Hawaii mai au. He kanaka Hawaii. No pahala mai au I ka'u mokupuni nui o Keawe. A ka I keia manawa noho au ma Keomo lewa ma ka aina pono I o ka la hui maskuiam. My name is Candace Kaleimamoowahinekapu Galla. I am Native Hawaiian from the island of Hawaii. I currently reside in Vancouver on the traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Hunkamina Musqueam-speaking people. Ke'ewe hanau o ka'ina. Throughout my presentation, I will include Olelo no Eau, or Hawaiian sayings that have been compiled in the book Olelo no Eau, Hawaiian Proverbs and Poetical Sayings by Mary Kawena Pukui. The number listed here indicates the number used to identify within the Olelo no Eau book. I've provided the reference on this slide only, which you can see below. While I was born and raised at a time when Hawaiian language programs were in its infancy in hopes to reestablish a once flourishing language, the language of my home was English, though my father spoke Ilocano, Tagalog, and English, and my mom, English. My first introduction to Hawaiian language was through my mom, who is a kumuhula, or hula dance master. I didn't realize at that time that I was indeed learning aspects of the language by virtue of dancing hula, chanting and singing. We embodied the lyrics through our hand motions, through our foot movements, facial expressions, costumes, lei, and adornments. Though my mom didn't teach hula through Olelo Hawaii, the hula, again the dance, mele, the songs, and oli, our chants, we learned and danced reflected the Hawaiian culture, past, present, and future histories, and understanding of our world. So these are just a few of the photos from when I was a baby, a child, and an adult, and then later sharing hula in Australia with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island women. Ka'ike a kamakua he na keiki. I didn't formally learn Hawaiian language until I attended Kamehameha schools as a boarder on the island of Oahu in Honolulu. I enrolled in 6 years of Hawaiian language at Kamehameha, but it's important to note that I am still very much a learner of Olelo Hawaii. While at Kamehameha, I learned, like I said, Hawaiian, but it was taught through English, and it wasn't until maybe my last year at school that we were learning through Olelo Hawaii. While I was going to school at Kamehameha, my parents moved away to the continental US, to Oregon, and later to Arizona. Through visits during the winter and summer break, I began to appreciate my culture even more, as I didn't always have ready access to it. A'ole no iike ke kanaka I nā nani o kona wahi I hanau I ai. And so as a young person, I would look at my peers who would be able to go back to the various islands and be with family. And while I did have siblings and other family that lived in Hawaii, I would return back to Oregon and again Arizona to be with my father and my mother. And things like access to not only Hawaiian language, but through hula, through our flowers, through the beaches, just the land, that was not available to me. So I had a deeper appreciation at a younger age while my parents lived away from Hawaii. Ewe hanau o ka'ina. Following graduation, I attended the University of Arizona in Tucson on the traditional lands of the Tohono receiving my BA and MA degree in Native American linguistics and a PhD in language, reading, and culture. And it was through the Native American Language and Linguistics Master's Program and the American Indian Language Development Institute specifically that I owe gratitude as I met Indigenous and non-Indigenous professors who would later become colleagues and mentors, people like Ophelia Zepeda, Akira Yamamoto, Lucia Wadahamaji, Susan Penfield, Mary Willie, and many others. I met other Indigenous peers, Indigenous thinkers and scholars through ALDI, who are language learners like myself, who would move to Tucson for higher education. We would become lifelong friends as we navigated the academic system together. At that time, when I was going to school in the College of Education, we had no Indigenous faculty. We had no mentors to look to, but we had each other. My peers with lived experiences in community, now living away from their traditional homelands, helped me to expand my understanding of language revitalization and education broadly defined. During my PhD program, I enrolled in an international seminar course that met through video conferencing with Drs. Perry Gilmore, Lacey Wyman, and the other site facilitators included professors like Pilo Wilson from University of Hawaii at Hilo, Ray Barnhart at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and the late Bill Demert, who was at Western Washington University. And it was a very exciting time for me because as a Native Hawaiian and language learner, I would be able to learn directly from Indigenous language educators as well as Hawaiian language educators who have been involved with Hawaiian immersion and medium education from its inception. O ke aloha ke kuleana o kahi malihini. I was also fortunate to work at the American Indian Language Development Institute in different capacities and later as a program coordinator. And through one of my professional development workshops, I was able to attend one of the workshops offered through ILI, the Indigenous Language Institute, on Ancient Voices, Modern Tools. And there I met Ine Slaughter and the entire team that included Chris Harvey and many others, many of whom were Indigenous themselves and involved in technology training. I was hooked and that helped to solidify my path in Indigenous language revitalization and technology. I was invited to join the team that would offer training across the US in various Indigenous communities. It is through these institutions that I've made long-lasting friendships, did most of my learning through engagement with Indigenous language learners and speakers, allies working in community to support language priorities. I was not treated indifferent or as a stranger because of my identity or my lack of language or an experience in my community, but rather I was taken in, embraced and mentored and provided opportunities for language learning and teaching. So a heartfelt mahalo to ILI for all those years of inviting me to be a part of the ohana. Ua lehu a mano ka ikena a ka Hawaii. And apologies, all errors on this presentation are my own, and my apologies for my pronunciation mistakes. So at that time, thinking about Indigenous language revitalization and reconnecting with Hawaiian language, I started to learn that there is great knowledge, of course, within our language and within our culture. And so I thought of what would be the opportunity or what would it be like for me to return back to my home community, a place that not only I was born and raised, but a place that I was rooted in, though I moved away again for university, and maybe we could say other opportunities. Ho'iho I kehu mehe moela. The class that I mentioned earlier with the various universities, including University of Hawaii at Hilo, opened up many relationships, such that when I graduated, I returned back to the Big Island for 1 year as a visiting assistant professor in Kahakaula o Ke'elikulani College of Hawaiian Language at the University of Hawaii at Hilo. It was an overwhelming and wonderful experience for me, and I'm very thankful for my time there. I remember just reflecting on that year. All of the meetings were, of course, in Olelo, Hawaii. Majority of our classes taught through the college was in Olelo, Hawaii. And while I taught linguistics courses taught through English, I did have students that were from not only within the College of Hawaiian Language, but across the university. And so I was able to engage students in different indigenous languages as well, or indigenous language examples. Following a year after my position at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, I would then move to Canada to begin my faculty position at the University of British Columbia, where I would learn of similar assimilative practices that have happened to Indigenous peoples in what is now known as Canada. As now an associate professor in the Department of Language and Literacy Education in the Faculty of Education and the First Nations and Endangered Languages program in the Institute for Critical Indigenous Studies in the Faculty of Arts, I'm again grateful for the many opportunities, learning opportunities, and meaningful relationships that have blossomed. I'm of course filled with gratitude for shared time and space, especially for being invited into community, to be able to share not only my experiences and teachings, but to also experience and engage in their language, culture, education, and lens. Though my relationships extend far and wide across oceans, deserts, temperate rainforests, my heart remains in Hawaii, my birth sands and the lands where my kupuna, or elders, are buried. As a Kanaka diaspora living on indigenous lands of the Musqueam, and now living away from Hawaii for more than half of my life, I am keenly aware of my positionality and the complexity it may bring out for some. The terminology that is meant to be inclusive sometimes also causes more confusion or generalization and/or division. Academic institutions, federal granting agencies may adopt particular sets of definitions that do not align with Indigenous understandings. With that being said, as I use the term Indigenous throughout this talk, I want to direct you to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and it provides some structural understanding how I am framing Indigenous. I also want to acknowledge that I'm not speaking for or on behalf of the communities that claim me, nor of Indigenous peoples, communities, and nations in general. And I want to emphasize that, of course, there's no singular, homogeneous Indigenous epistemology that can capture the uniquenesses, complexities, nuances, and worldviews of distinct Indigenous peoples, as there is, of course, no one size that fits all. The intent of this presentation is to encourage dialogue about the diasporic community that is looking to reconnect and/or maintain their respective languages. These communities are important as more and more of us are leaving our traditional homelands for a number of reasons. According to the 2020 US Census, more than half of Native Hawaiians reside on the continental US. The Native Hawaiian alone, or in any combination population, grew by 29.1% from approximately 527,000 in 2010 to 680,000 in 2020. It remained the largest Native Hawaiian or a Pacific Island alone or in any combination group in 2020, comprising nearly 40% of this population. As we can see from the image to the right, California, Washington, Nevada, and Texas are the states with the highest counts of Native Hawaiians. Here's a map that indicates the largest demographic of Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone, or in any combination group by state. As you can see here, a majority of the states have more Native Hawaiians than any other Pacific Islander alone, or in any combination, with the exception of Alaska, Utah, and Arkansas. When you do go to this site, if you click or hover over each of the state, a number will appear. And here's a detailed table of selected counties in the 3 largest detailed Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander alone or in any combination. And I know it's quite small, but skipping over the counties within Hawaii, I want to direct us to Clark County in Nevada. The largest group are Native Hawaiians with 23,000 people. In San Diego County, with nearly 11,000 Native Hawaiians, followed by LA County as the second largest group with approximately 16,000, Sacramento County, 5,300, and then followed by Salt Lake City, where Native Hawaiians are the 3rd largest group with 3,800, and in Pierce County, Washington, with 6,600 Native Hawaiians. And just for fun, I also downloaded the map of New Mexico to share where there are Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders residing. In the state of New Mexico, according to the census, there are approximately 2,400 Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders alone or in any combination group. Here in Sandoval County, there are 304 Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islander alone or in any combination group. And in Bernalillo County, there are approximately 1,000 Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders alone or in any combination. So Native Hawaiians are everywhere. I guess we have to fill out this map because there's some white spaces here. So what about Native Hawaiian diaspora in other parts of the world, like myself? There are many of us as Indigenous peoples who live away from our traditional homelands, live in different countries because of opportunities, because of our families, work, school, and so forth. And how many of us, maybe by a show of hands, currently live away from your traditional homelands? And how many of us lived away from our traditional homelands at one point in our life? And look around. Yeah. What about our children, our parents, our family, our friends? We all know at least someone that lives or have lived away from their traditional homelands. In Canada, 82% of persons who identify as First Nations, Inuit, and or Métis live off reserve. And this is from Statistics Canada in 2023, more than 82%. In the US, approximately 78% of Native Americans live off tribal lands. And that was a statistics that I found in 2010 through the US Census. I couldn't find more updated information. There, of course, is a strong desire by Indigenous families and young people who are part of the diaspora to reclaim Indigenous and linguistic cultural practices, as there is an increase in language immersion schools, cultural programming, centers in urban centers or urban spaces away from our traditional homelands. Culture and language are social determinants of health, and the disruption of language and cultural transmission can adversely affect mental health, well-being, and identity. And we heard from Doug yesterday about the impact of language on health and well-being. For those of us who are part of the diaspora, language is one of the identifiers that helps us to connect with others in foreign lands and territories. Our values as a people are embedded and embodied within our language. No matter the foreign lands that we traverse and or reside, our language is something that we can take with us no matter where we go. Our voice is our instrument that incorporates all of our senses and is a key marker of the lands that we are from. Language is an embodied cultural practice. So it is no surprise that for a diaspora like myself, that language is one of the components of culture that we seek to gain knowledge of, to relearn who we are, to reconnect to our heritage, to develop our identity, to understand the stories that we are told, to rediscover knowledge that is held within archives, documents, and recordings and so forth. Ki ko'ele huliamahi. While language revitalization is a huge undertaking for any one person, we know that there is strength in numbers. For diaspora, this is even more challenging, as for some that have not grown up in the community, they may not know what resources are available, authentic or even reliable. As we now are encountering generative AI, there is an abundance of data and information, but that does not mean that diaspora know where to look or even have access to language materials that can help them to reconnect, learn, and or maintain their languages. So when we plan, develop our language programs, projects, let's not forget our loved ones that are part of that diaspora. Language revitalization and reclamation is a lifetime commitment for us as Indigenous peoples, and invite all to engage in this initiative, this project, this long-term goal of ours. Eala, ealu, e kuilima. As language advocates, we need to raise the awareness and consciousness of the value and importance of our Indigenous languages. That language is more than a means of communication, but it really is a way to nurture and heal ourselves from the inside out, as our language embodies our ways of knowing, being, and doing. We need all the help we can get to take on this long-term goal of ours. While not everyone will be, of course, on board, we need those that are committed to this language journey. We leave the door open to those who want to join at a later time, and those that may need to step away from time to time, so that those that are committed can continue to do the work without any disruption. A'ohe hana nui ke aluia. Together, there is no task that cannot be accomplished. There are obstacles along the way that, of course, many of us have encountered in our language journey. However, we can look to our brothers and sisters from neighboring communities, nations, near and far, to learn of strategies, brave practices that have helped to propel their language. This can include different pedagogies, research, technologies, curriculum development, assessment, and so forth. We have an amazing wealth of resources here in this room right now, from first language speakers, second language learners, elders, youth, cultural practitioners, community scholars, authors, grant writers, academics, researchers, administrators, government officials, and so forth. This includes Indigenous and non-Indigenous allies. When we take note of all of our strengths and strong suits together, we cannot be stopped. E lau hoi mai na va'a, I ke ka I ka hoi I ke ka, pai aku I ka aina. We can recognize that within our respective communities, there may be different language projects and initiatives that we engage in depending on our discipline, our background, our department, organization that we are a part of. While we may not all be working together on the same exact project or paddling in the same canoe, we are still working toward or going in the same direction and towards the goal of language renewal, whether that is reclamation or revitalization. There may be a canoe for languageness preschools, another for K-12 immersion, for adult immersion, for community programming, for diaspora. All of these learners and users of the language deserve time and space to engage in language, though will require different resources, tools, and learning opportunities. Through my lived experiences, language work, and research, I've observed some of these activities and initiatives in various settings. So we have 3 images here, the first of which is the growing number of language users within Hawaii. The second, the growing number of language users within the continental US. And then the last is outside of the US. And I purposely made some of these kind of grayed out to showcase where we are currently in our language revitalization movement. In Hawaii, many of us, or some of us, have visited Hawaii and attended some of the language nest preschools or Hawaiian language medium education programs, and or visited some of the college programs that offer language medium education or Hawaiian immersion programs. Many of our schools, whether it's our public school system, have and include language and culture education. Maybe this is not exactly teaching language itself, but teaching about language, teaching about cultural practices. We have immersion. Maybe immersion is within English medium schools. So we have standalone programs that are in Olelo, Hawaii, but within a system that is operating within English. Then we have Hawaiian language medium education, and we call this the P through 25, or the cradle to career in Hawaii. And an example of this is on the island of Hawaii, the Big Island, where I reside, or have resided. You're able to enroll children as early as 6 weeks old in Olelo, Hawaii, continue on through language nest preschools, K through 12 education, all in Olelo, Hawaii. Administrators, caretakers of the land, bus drivers, everyone that is involved in this system, in the language medium education system, speak Olelo, Hawaii. You can continue on through the University of Hawaii at Hilo, through the College of Hawaiian Language, Kahakaula o Ke'elikolani, and continue with a BA, MA, your graduate teaching certification, as well as a PhD, all in Olelo, Hawaii. And this is the first Indigenous language within Hawaii to be able to do so at that level. So thinking outside of this Hawaiian language medium education, we of course have university language courses on different islands, maybe community colleges that offer Olelo, Hawaii as a standalone course. We have cultural practices that are also taught, like hula. And hula has become a globalized phenomenon, such that in foreign lands, distant lands, not only in the continental US, but also Canada, Mexico, Japan, Europe, there are many learners of hula. In fact, there are, I believe, over 1 million people in Japan that are practitioners of hula. The foundation of hula is language. So if we're learning hula, we're also learning language. But in some instances, because hula is now being taught outside of Hawaii, people are learning hula sometimes as choreography, as opposed to learning hula as an embodied cultural practice. So that is one of the challenges with globalization, and of course with internet and having access to hula online. So as Native Hawaiians and cultural practitioners, we need to really think about what is it that we're sharing. Of course, we can share hula and our knowledge of it, but also protecting it and really ensuring that when we teach this, we are sharing with the students that this is a cultural practice that is specific to Hawaii and that it needs to be respected when it's, of course, not only in Hawaii, but outside of our traditional lands. There are, of course, a growing number of language users that have accessed online technology, online learning. And of course, through COVID, we've seen an increase in digital tools, resources, programming to allow for language to continue, and intergenerational language transmission. While I share some of these maybe successes within the state of Hawaii, this doesn't mean that everyone in Hawaii has access to Olelo, Hawaii, or language education. We have a shortage of Hawaiian language teachers. There is a waiting list to get into our schools. So this is something I know that we all face in Indigenous language revitalization. And in the grayed out area here, it says growing number of language users. We need to really increase that in all domains of life. And I think we've heard that in various presentations in the last couple of days. So if we move over to the continental US, the two areas that are really being where language is being accessed is through online learning and through cultural practices. I've also, again, mentioned briefly about the growth of hula. And so this is something that, of course, is taking off. And there are instances where Hawaiian language has been taught in different states. So depending on community scholars, cultural practitioners, academics, they are teaching Olelo Hawaii, whether it's in community or through university settings, and this also includes language and culture education. Now, outside of the US, thinking of our diaspora, again, hula cultural practices are being practiced and engaged through online learning. So some guiding principles, whether we are part of the diaspora or engaging with the diaspora. I've included some of these olelo no eau. I ka olelo no keola, I ka olelo no kamake. Language has power. Our voices have power to heal, power to destroy. When we are teaching, learning, using the language, let's be mindful of how we correct, criticize, critique, laugh at, and reprimand mistakes and errors in language use, as this can be a determining factor on whether an individual continues in their language journey or stops altogether. Of course, there is humor in our language. In this room, we probably can share many lived experiences of what we've encountered. I certainly have my share of examples that have made me question and pause my learning. Examples like, "You don't even sound like you're from here," or "I know you're trying, but please just use English." While these may not have been intended to hurt, this was definitely an indicator that I was looked at as someone who didn't belong, just because of how I sounded. So let's be kind and compassionate in our learning. Uola loko I ke aloha. Dr. Little Bear mentioned that for him, his Cheyenne language provides a spiritual connection and one that evokes love. If language is love and love gives life within, then language is critical to our health and well-being, a social determinant of health. When we breathe life into our language, it is healing for the many generations, past, present, and emerging. A'ohe pau ka ike I ka halau ho'okahi. For diaspora, it is likely that they are looking for any and all resources. These may include physical resources, archival resources, audio, video, that they can learn from. For some, they may not be learning from a language teacher themselves, but through self-directed study, through, again, physical resources or digital resources. All learners can learn from many sources through different methods, as we are diverse learners with diverse learning styles. So let's acknowledge the wealth of resources that we can learn from, whether from our individual families, cultural practitioners, from our cultural practices, educational institutions, online resources, and so forth. Li'ili'i manuai laiki akamai kahana punana. Every role and responsibility is important. In language work, we don't just need families, students, teachers, administrators, curriculum and materials developers, but we also need bus drivers, kitchen staff, grant writers, illustrators, authors, custodians, farmers, coaches, restaurants, grocery stores, banks, the list goes on, gas stations, small business owners, lawyers, nonprofit organizations, government officials, academics, to help us on this journey. No title or role is too small. We all have a role and responsibility in language revitalization, whether we live in community or are part of the diaspora, whether we are Indigenous or a non-Indigenous ally. A'a I ka hula, waiho ka hila hila I ka hale. So basically, leave shyness at home. Our shyness should be left at the metaphorical door when dancing hula, but this can of course apply to language as well. A'a I ka olelo, waiho ka hila hila I ka hale. We also need to change our ideology that learning our language is difficult and hard. When we articulate to ourselves, to each other, and to our learners that learning to pronounce our language is hard, learning to read, write, and speak, to conjugate verbs, again, the list goes on, we are not setting up our students for success or our learners for success. Use words of encouragement and praise even when errors are made, as this is part of everyone's language learning journey. E kuhi kuhi pono I na ao iki, a me na ao nui o ka ike. The quality of language of native language teachers are essential not only for revitalization, but also serves as an exemplar for students who are learning and speaking the language. High quality teaching, therefore, is necessary as it impacts the student's quality of comprehensible input and output and will continually affect the standard of the language for generations to come. So while grammar, pronunciation, linguistics are important to our language learning, let's not forget about body language and behavior as well. He vai vai nui ka lo kahi. While we need to accept our diversity and perspectives, we can be unified in prioritizing language, in giving life to language. While our pronunciations may not be the same as we train our brain and our mouth to move in ways that are unfamiliar, we can be unified in finding domains where we can use the language. Of course, we'd love to use a language in all domains in life. We may have different strategies, pedagogies, resources, but having a unified front with language is important as we continue to paddle our canoes toward land. Uau Hawaii ke olino nei ma lama lama. The time for us to reconnect to language is now. In the publication Encouragement, Guidance, Insights, and Lessons Learned for Native language activists developing their own tribal language programs, written by the late Darrell Kipp, co-founder of the Pagan Institute of the Blackfeet Nation, in conversation with 12 visiting Native American language activists, he shared 4 rules. Rule number 1, never ask permission, never beg to save the language. Rule 2, don't debate the issues. Rule 3, be very action-oriented, just act. And Rule 4, show, don't tell. He encourages us as language people to take it upon ourselves to do this courageous act of language learning and teaching. So be brave and just do it. We are at a point in time of critical awareness, a raising of consciousness within and beyond our communities through international initiatives like UNESCO's International Decade of Indigenous Languages, which began in 2022 and will continue to 2032. Prior to that, we had the International Year of Indigenous Languages in 2019. What have we done as individuals, family units, communities, and nations, and the country to ensure that our languages are not only recognized for this decade, but for the next 7 generations? The time is now to engage, learn, use, transmit, and pass on our Indigenous languages. There is momentum from UNESCO, various UN regions, and the representatives to help raise awareness and urgency to engage in language work. That could mean documentation, archival work, with the intention that will support language communities in their reclamation and revitalization efforts, initiatives, programming, and priorities. While education has been an effective strategy to destroy Indigenous nations, communities, cultures, and livelihood, including our languages, education is also a place for language recovery, restoration, and renewal. Ho'i ho I ka iwi kua mo'o. Through our languages, we reconnect and maintain our relationships with traditional homelands, our community, families, and other kin. Our language leads us back to our communities, whether for a moment in time through a FaceTime video call, a Zoom language class, a return home to connect with loved ones, or a final return to stay. Language has the capacity to bring us home because there is no other land that speaks or loves our language like we do. We return to our homelands to garner strength, to become whole again, so that we can continue our language work no matter where we reside in the world. So the next 50 years, while the numbers are likely to increase for Indigenous diaspora, we can anticipate that individuals and families will continue to search and find ways to reconnect and maintain their identities, one of which is through language. My hope and aspirations as we include the diasporic Indigenous language communities that live in urban city centers, rural areas, other territories, and countries around the world is that we can be able to use our languages while residing anywhere in the world. So as we seek funding, write up new proposals, develop language initiatives and programs, create language materials and resources, hold language gatherings, teach cultural practices, let's not forget about those who are part of the diasporic community, those who are living away from their traditional homelands. Prior to COVID, there was a hesitancy, maybe even some resistance towards using digital tools and technologies for language learning and teaching. What the pandemic has taught us is that we can indeed utilize digital tools to bring together people, to share knowledge and resources, to teach and learn, sometimes making the opportunity for language work more convenient. We need to be inclusive of finding ways to make known to our community members, including those that are part of the diaspora, language resources that are available, whether in print or digital form, that they can access. Part of the challenge is knowing where to go to find these resources, whether it is a physical location, online space, or individual person or organization. As we anticipate a growth in our languages, whether in community or outside of community, I want to ask you to reflect on the following questions as it relates to these different domains of language, starting with the innermost circle, individual, and expanding out, family and friends, work and school, commerce, community, and then the larger circle there, state, nation, country, and the world. In what ways do we as individuals shape the language context we live in? And how are we shaped by our context? What are we willing to do to transform our language capacity, to strengthen our connections with language users, speakers, and learners in community and diaspora, to raise awareness and consciousness of others so that they can join us on our journey towards healing of our communities? What will it take to continue to grow these numbers inside and outside our traditional territories? We need to recognize that every place English is used, we should be able to use our Indigenous languages in those spaces as well. Really, again, in all domains of life. So some of these include thinking of speaking, writing, listening, observing, expressing, dreaming in language. These are all things that have been said over the last couple of days, whether it's through presentations or through our discussions. Serving, training, teaching, learning, mentoring, guiding, coaching, having opportunities to learn about language, learn of language, and learn through the language. We need to be able to buy and sell, bank. This can include having food labels in our language, designing in language, having media, print, radio, TV, online spaces. Let's make language visible through art, signage, alongside dominant foreign and colonial languages. Let's advocate for official language status in our states. Let's adopt the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a framework to protect our language rights. We need to be able to provide our diaspora opportunities to use language in as many domains as possible, to engage our senses, to be able to Google in our languages, to podcast, to learn language on the radio, on digital spaces, watch news, TV shows, again, movies, socialize, develop language materials, wear, embody our language, perform, dance, sing, write checks in our language, use social media in the language, play sports, play games. While these are available, all of these activities are available in our Hawaiian language communities. These are not yet available for our diasporic Hawaiian language communities. As we near the end of the presentation, I want to share this photo that I took at the Honolulu International Airport while walking to the international terminal. Ka wā mamua, ka wā mahope. Now read the English here. Lessons from the past are the key to the future. Which also means aya na ha'ina I loko o kākou. The solutions and answers are already within us. Make no ke kalo aola I ka pilili. We carry on the language and culture of our parents, our grandparents, and those that have came before us. Language is within us through blood memory, through this connection that extends from our umbilical cord to our mother and all of her relations before her. These memories, experiences are waiting to reemerge. The sounds of our language are waiting to be spoken, waiting for air to be expended through our oral and nasal cavity so that our ears can hear these sounds that have been a part of our heart even before we were born. Let our bodies, hearts, and mind remember our language for our future generations. E ola ka olelo Hawaii, e ola na olelo oiwi. May Hawaiian language continue to live on. May our indigenous languages continue to live on. Mahalo.